black lab and an Idaho shag, and there will be pictures. We'll talk about fasting. So what we're going to do first, it's 6 o'clock and I like to start on time. First thing we're going to do is a little poll. And I think I'm going to, we're going to launch the poll. So you can now see the poll and I'm going to read the questions. And I want you to just take a moment to answer each one. This helps me a little bit and maybe it'll help us guide the talk a little bit. Number one, how many of you have had a family member with dementia? And you can pick one or more of those questions. If you've had a mother, father, sibling, aunt, uncle, grandparent. And if you're not really sure who or what the relationship was to you, and it's not in this list, just check grandparent. Number two, at what age did you start thinking about your brain health? Just pick an answer there and we'll see how those accumulate. Have you considered diet and lifestyle changes to aid in your either recovery, or let's assume that we're all as mentally healthy as we'd like to be, in your maintenance of mental function? So either maintenance or recovery. And would you drastically change your diet if you knew it would help your brain function or other ailments? You know, I say to people, this is no big deal. This is the way I eat all the time. Well, how handy. It's the way I eat, not completely, but all the time. So for me, the idea of changing is not a big deal. But for some people, the changes we ask them to make are pretty profound. So I'm going to leave that up there. And I think it will stay up if I start sharing my screen. And we've got, of course, a talk to get to tonight. Move this out of the way. And great. So this talk I actually first put together last March, if you might remember. Maybe, I think it was February. And I was going to give the talk at the end of February at the Smolin Center, and we had snow, kind of an atypical snow. No problem, we'll put it off till March. So we're slated to give it then at the end of March at the Smolin Center. And so you can imagine that that never happened. But while I was working on this talk, I saw on Twitter this tweet. My mom has stage 6 dementia. We're moving her to memory care. Wish me luck. And I would say that it'd be great to wish you luck. And there's a lot more, I think, to say to somebody whose mom is going into memory care. Of course, you wish the best for your mom. You hope that she's in a lovely place like this. That's a garden where you're able to magically visit her because it's not coronavirus. I'm going to end that poll just to have it out of my way. But beyond that, when someone has a family member who has Alzheimer's or even knows somebody well, and particularly if somebody's been a caretaker for someone with Alzheimer's, they begin to wonder, if someone in my family has it, could I get it? If I've taken care of somebody who has it, now this is going to sound maybe crazy to some of you, but caretakers, non-related, have a much higher incidence of Alzheimer's than the general population. So people wonder, is it contagious? Is it genetic? Could I get this? Am I at risk? So Northwest Memory Center, and thanks to you all who participated in finding us a new name, we're now going to be, as soon as we get the logo worked out, it'll be on my next talk, Northwest Memory and Wellness Center, because we really do brain and wellness for kind of everybody. and to talk about genetic and Alzheimer's. I want to give a special thanks to Dr. Sharon Hausman Cohen, MD, she's the founding medical director of a company called Intellex DNA, which I'll share more information with you about that company as we go on. We're going to go over a primer on genetics, taking us back to whatever high school biology covered for us in the way of genetics, genomics and the brain, and the question, what do I do? The difference between genetics and genomics. Genetics is, wow, Watson and Crick discovered DNA, and we discovered parts of the DNA have an impact on the person who has that DNA. Genomics is beginning to look at the genetics related to a person, related to their environment, and predicting how the gene is going to affect that person and how it might interact with that person's environment and the choices that person makes. So your whole collection of DNA is your genome. It's like a code, or people say it's like a user manual on what your body is going to do with all its raw material and how it's going to put together a human being. Until recently, there was a lot of information in the DNA that didn't translate very well into real life information, but we can do a little bit more of that now. So I think you've heard the word chromosomes, and your DNA is organized into 23 pairs of chromosomes. Here's a pair. They're found in the nucleus of each cell, and it's DNA wrapped around proteins and then a cushioning wrapped around the DNA. And we protect it very well because it has to last us our whole life. It can get damaged in the process of living our lives and can hopefully get rebuilt. And it's going to constantly be messed with as our body grows, recovers, rebuilds itself. So in your DNA is made up, it's kind of like a ladder. And the rails of the ladder are a chain of protein and sugar that, links one to the other. So this is what's kind of called the backbone of the DNA, or the side rails of the ladder. And the rungs of the ladder consist of a nitrogen-based group. They're color-coded here. There are really just 4 of them. And pretty much they always pair up this way. If you've got a green one, it's going to have a blue one opposite it. And if you've got a blue one, it's going to have a green one. An orange one's going to have a purple one. This is your DNA code. It's written with these 4 letters, G, C, A, and T. And you have about 3 billion of these letters in your DNA. Okay, bear with me. This is a science part. It's going to get more humanely interesting in a moment. What we're going to talk about tonight is how a change of one side of one pair in one strand can have an impact on your life. So here's Purple Man up above. And in Purple Man's purple chain, he's got an A right here. And Purple Man has a child, a blue child, who also had a mother. And the mother had a G where Purple Man has an A. There are many genes where we expect to see something. Almost everybody has an A in this part, or the majority of people have an A in this part of the code. But Mom had a G, so Blue Man can have a G or a SNP, a polymorphism, a change in shape of one single nucleotide. But that's not so bad because it's what makes us unique. It can be on a pretty simple level, like whether your eyes are blue or brown, depends on this kind of variant. Well, it's pretty non-consequential. But it can also mean something more significant. So if you think of a SNP, you think of your genetic material as a recipe from which you're going to bake a loaf of bread, given this little picture here. And one SNP changes a word early in the recipe. And the recipe says, put all the wet ingredients into a bowl. And one recipe says, stir the wet ingredients. And one recipe says, blend the wet ingredients. Who really cares? Either way could make this loaf of bread that's on the left. But if one word changes bake to roast, or the temperature from 350 to 450, it can have a pretty drastic outcome with every possibility in between, from completely inconsequential to devastating. So genomics, as I was saying, is when we identify these SNPs and look at them carefully to see how they affect you and how they will relate to your environment, which then gives you choices about how you're going to live your life. 23andMe, you can go to 23andMe and send them your saliva, and you can ask for a health reading or a medical version. I think it's called of 23andMe. You can get just raw data and ancestry for $99, or you can pay twice that much and say, tell me medically what's true about me. And you're going to learn this is from my medical DNA. Oh my goodness, there's a 65% chance I do not have dimples. I do not have dimples, but this is really the equivalent of the difference between blend and stir the wet ingredients. It doesn't really matter. They also talk about health issues. And one of the ones that I was interested in was breast cancer. The BRCA gene relates to an increased risk of breast cancer, and I didn't have any SNPs in that area. We could talk a lot about that, but that is clearly not the only determinant of breast cancer risk, because I'm sure my mother, who had breast cancer, did not have the BRCA gene also. But there is a rare neurological disease where I do have a single variant. And if the father of my child had also had that and we had selected for it, we could have had a devastating effect in our child. But it's a very rare variant. So it's not something that's even typically done in genetic testing. It's not something that, oh, I have a long family history of this, we should test for it before I have my children. So it can give you inconsequential results and very consequential results. I was happy to say I didn't have the BRCA gene. Now, anybody who knows me very well knows that I am a big fan of eating protein. Animal protein, and in this case, animal proteins that a vegetarian could eat, and animal proteins that an omnivore could eat. And one of the reasons I think animal protein is so great for you is that it provides B12. And B12 is critical for body health, brain health in every way. You have many SNPs in your genetic code that relate to how you handle vitamin B12. Having one a little bit different than what you would ideally like it to be, chews up your vitamin B12 before you get a chance to use it, so that you may need 100 times more than average. A different one makes it hard to carry B12 into the brain. Another makes it hard for B12 to work overall. And if you're going to take a supplement, you have to kind of read the back of the supplement container to make sure you're getting the kind of B12 that your genetics suggest you need. So I can get this kind of information from somebody's raw data at 23andMe. They don't tell you this information. So thinking about that gene for B12, let's think about how does that relate when one little SNP can do so many things with one vitamin, B12. How does that relate to you if your mother has Alzheimer's disease? And if you ask the Alzheimer's Association, they'd say, forget it. There's no way that Alzheimer's can be prevented, slowed, or cured, and they would consider that anything to the contrary sows false hope. And I understand that. That's worthy of guarding against. What I'm going to tell you about is not false hope. If you ask the pharmaceutical company if they have a drug for Alzheimer's disease and should I have my genes to help pick the drug, they'd say there is no drug that significantly slows Alzheimer's disease. There are a few drugs that can improve function temporarily, but in the long run, the disease catches up with you in the same time frame it would have had you not taken the drug. So what are we left with? I'm saying there's a bright light at the end of the tunnel, really, if you look at your genetics. So what does that consist of? Well, bear with me, this part's science, but it's going to get kind of conceptual in a way that we can all understand. You'll grant me, I think, that we've learned that any significant chronic disease has many components to it. Somebody doesn't get a heart attack just because they have high cholesterol or just because they have high blood pressure. There's plenty of people who have high blood pressure and never had and do have a heart attack, or people who have high blood pressure and never have a heart attack. It's complex. You're not going to get a significant cardiac problem unless you get multiple problems, not necessarily all of them, but many of the problems in the list on the left side of the screen. That is well understood, well accepted. The world hasn't quite evolved to the point of believing that the same is true about Alzheimer's, that Alzheimer's is a particular kind of neurodegeneration, but you have to have some degeneration of the neural tissue in the brain. There will be some amyloid there. That's what makes it an Alzheimer's dementia as opposed to the dementia of Parkinson's or some other kind of dementia. All these other characteristics contribute to a greater or lesser degree in each individual person who has Alzheimer's disease. Okay, but we're talking about genetics. We're talking about variants. And I'm saying that there are variants that not just like the ones that determine eye color that can help us figure out what your exact risk is of Alzheimer's disease and what we can do about it. If you look at the risk orchestrated by your genes, the gene that deserves our greatest attention is ApoE4. And I'm going to explain why, but to let you know there are many others. So the ApoE, so let's just, again, this is just sort of the basic genetics. Everybody has an ApoE gene, an ApoE location on their DNA. And you have a number tagged gene on one side and a number tagged gene on the other. Each one is either a 2, a 3, or a 4. And most of us got a 3 from mom and a 3 from dad. So we're ApoE 3-3. About 25% of us got a 3 from one parent, and we can't tell which one, unless you have a strong family history, and a 4 from the other parent. That would be an ApoE 3-4. And those people have really double the risk of getting Alzheimer's at any given age. Late onset Alzheimer's, so we're talking about 60s, 70s, 80s. A very small number of us got a 4 from mom and a 4 from dad, and those people have about a 90% chance of getting Alzheimer's disease, not 100. And you've certainly been in classes where you are in the top 10%. How do you get to be in the top 10% of that class? An equally small percentage of us got a 2 from one parent, and a 2 lowers your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So an ApoE 2-3 has less risk than an ApoE 3-3. They also have less risk than an ApoE 3-4. That 2 is a little protective for the brain, but it's not protective for the heart. And the ApoE 4 gene doubles your risk of Alzheimer's disease and increases your risk of cardiovascular disease. But even more importantly, I want you to imagine, I had to write this out to make sure this metaphor stayed consistent. Let's just imagine that you have a sailboat and your main crew person, maybe this person in the yellow shirt, is the weather reader. You'd like somebody as your weather reader who can read the weather and figure out what to do for the day. Either say, it's going to be a great day for sailing. Let's get all the sails out and ready to go. We're going to cover a lot of sea territory, sea miles today. Or they'll say, we're not going to expect very much today. We can go down and take naps. Maybe today's the day you read your book. Or they can say, it's going to be a terrible day. We need to find a port in a storm. Or they can say, oh my goodness, tidal waves are coming. We need to abandon the ship, go back to the Jeep and head for high ground, and we'll never see the ship again. So now imagine that that sailboat is something like a cell in your brain. And each cell in your brain, and frankly, in the rest of your body, but you have more of them in your brain, has a weather person. And the ApoE4 weather person is way more likely to just say, I think it's a tidal wave coming and we're going to abandon ship. I'm going to sink the ship and we're going to leave it. And it's not that bad. It's really just a squall that's going to pass over. And the next day it's going to be a perfectly fine day and the ship can go on and sail across the sea. How does this relate to the brain? Your brain, like your bones, and really like no other tissue of significance in your body, is constantly assessing, are things good here? Can I build a new brain cell? Because the one over here that I had last week got kind of damaged because we, were poisoned by some poisonous food poisoning over the weekend, and that brain cell doesn't look very good. I want to get rid of it, but I want to build a new one. Your brain is constantly making that assessment. And if you have ApoE2s and 3s, it's far more likely to say, doesn't look good right now to build a new brain cell, but let's just go down below. I think it's going to clear up. We're going to build a new brain cell tomorrow. People who have the ApoE4 are just far more likely to torch the whole project, that brain cell, not the whole brain, but they're far more likely to shut down that brain cell because of a bad weather day in such a way that it can't be re-upped, restarted. And that's the problem with ApoE4. And how it actually plays out in the brain is this whole list of problems that it can create. People who have that ApoE4 SNP find themselves having greater brain atrophy. If there is something like food poisoning or some other inhaled toxin that is bad for the brain cells, the neurons, ApoE4 increases that susceptibility, just, cuts that brain cell off at the roots. All these issues with problems made by the ApoE4 SNP and resilience of the brain decreased by the ApoE4 SNP. All of us lose the ability to some degree or other to use sugar as a tool, as a fuel in our brains as we get older. ApoE4s lose it more than other people. Lose the ability to regenerate brain cells that have been shut down because there was a weather squall yesterday. BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and there's a lot of genes that control BDNF. I'm going to tell you about a report that we run frequently at this office that will read you 2 or 3 different genes that just relate to BDNF, but so does ApoE4. It's a hormone that is created in the brain, a protein that is a messenger that also tells brain cells they can grow and thrive and build new brain cells. And you can, if you have a good amount of brain-derived neurotrophic factor and you go for a great run on a beautiful day and eat a healthy meal and get a good night's sleep, you're going to make more brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If you have an ApoE4 SNP or you have a SNP in the BDNF genes, you're not going to make as much, and you're going to need to go for a nice run, breathe clean air, and eat good meals more often. So all these different ways that ApoE4 interacts with the brain. And there could be more specifics here, but this, you can see it's a huge list. That's the bad news. The good news is we know what to do about it. And so the simplest of answers is to, first of all, find out if you have the ApoE4. And so you can do a simple blood test for the ApoE gene that insurance covers once in your life. I don't know how they keep track of it, but thankfully we're not that consistent yet with our insurance. So if you've had that test and lost it, you could probably do it again. But you can also get 23andMe raw data, half the price of the full medical panel. They'll still have all the information about you that a privacy intensely conscious person would not want them to have. They're going to have that. You can take that raw data and run it through the genetic analysis tool at a website called Found My Fitness. This is an interesting website. It's started by a woman named Rhonda Patrick, who had a podcast and is kind of like a current researcher, and she's interested in all this stuff. And she became interested in the work that was evolving over the last 5 years of addressing Alzheimer's disease, and had one of the speakers, one of the teachers that I work with on her podcast, who talked about the ApoE4 gene, and she decided to get herself tested, and she had the ApoE4 gene, and she realized, oh my goodness, I have the opportunity to completely change my life right now. Everybody should have this opportunity, and it does interact with other genes. We should make this a tool accessible to everybody. So if you run your genetics through the tool on her website, it costs $30, $40, $50, something like that. You get upgrades as they continue to upgrade them, and they give you dozens of genes that relate to brain health. So that's one way to do it. That's a little bit all do-it-yourself way, and it's not complete, but it is a lot of information. But say, where this comes up, the next solution comes up. Say you're somebody who doesn't have the ApoE4 gene, but you're getting dementia at an early age, and it really looks like Alzheimer's. And if you look at 100 people who have Alzheimer's disease, there's some interesting kind of just statistics about Alzheimer's. A third of them have 1 or 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene. 2/3 do not. Well, does that mean we just don't care about genetics for those people? No, it means there's other genes. I have a patient who has 2 copies of the ApoE4 gene, and yet she comes from a family in which no one has ever had Alzheimer's disease. She was beginning to have a little bit of changes, and on this full report that she did, we saw that she doesn't have any of the other genes. She doesn't have a problem in the BDNF gene. She doesn't have any of the genetic variants that often go with the ApoE4 variant and make it so likely to be bad news. So this full individual report also is based on saliva. This is a much more closely held product. And if you did want to know your DNA, but you didn't want your insurance company to know it, and you didn't want 23andMe to know it, I'd recommend you check with me about exploring an Intellex DNA kit. And the cognitive report alone, I believe, has been $600. It might be $700 now. Still, like, I don't know if I can't even remember the numbers, and I'm going to sound like I have a terrible tendency to exaggerate, but I know, 10 years ago to get this degree of information would have cost thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And I do not mind being corrected if I'm way wrong about that, but $600, $700 is a bargain if you're going to get a reading on numerous different ways that different SNPs can contribute to problems in the brain, or in the blood pressure, or in the circulation, or anything else that might be pertinent. And having that greater information from the full report not only is reassuring, I have the benefit of having really great vitamin D receptors. I know that I don't have to be hyper vigilant about taking my vitamin D because I have great ability to absorb and use vitamin D, whether it's in my diet or from the sun. An aside, where do you get vitamin D from your diet? Not supplemented. Okay, it's supplemented in milk and stuff like that. But you know, the best source of vitamin D in the diet is the lard of pork that gets to live out in the sun. So just bear that in mind. Um, the full panel can also tell you where you're likely to run into problems. Oh, my vitamin D receptors are great, but whoa, I do not have good detoxification genes. That's where I need to really be on my game. And so I think having whether it's the limited profile through Found My Fitness or the more complete profile through Intellex DNA or just the ApoE4 gene itself, we're going to get to has value to help you make choices that might be choices you want to live by. So because the ApoE4 gene does all these things that we've talked about, what would I do if I found out I had the ApoE4 gene? And this is the question, how can I make sure I keep a healthy brain? We're going to detail a pretty intense program that has a lot of components to it, most of which you're very capable of doing on your own. It has some side effects. You're more likely to lose any excess weight you have. You have less of a risk of diabetes and heart disease. And genes besides the ApoE4 gene, such as all the B, D, and F genes, are also, their mischief is mitigated by the steps we're going to talk about here. So this is the therapeutic protocol or the brain health program as described by Dr. Dale Bredesen in his book, The End of Alzheimer's, or his new book, The End of Alzheimer's Program. And I have a screenshot of the cover later on, but it's a brain healthy diet. It's regular food, a brain friendly lifestyle. It's not rocket science. Some supplements to nourish your brain, and key and not often appreciated until recently. And now, so there are 4 or 5 diet and lifestyle programs for brain health around the country that I know of. Cornell Weill has one. They're the ones who are pressuring the Alzheimer's organization to learn to pronounce the word prevention, which Alzheimer's organization doesn't like to say. Anyway, there are about 5 of these diet and lifestyle programs around the country. And I'd say 2/3 of them, about 6 of them, 4 of them do replace lost hormones, which is a bit controversial because hormones have gotten a bad rap. But these are the parts of a brain health program. I'm going to give you a lot of options. Do you have to do all of them? Probably not. Depends upon your genes. So we have a dietary strategy that is important, and this very first slide is going to answer one person's question. And essentially the dietary strategy is that you eat healthy protein, and there's a lot of pictures of fish in this presentation, but more of the plate is taken up with vegetables than it is with fish. And if that were really my plate, or if you really want to follow some really great food photography, you should follow Rachel Lee, who's on this call, and our office manager on her Instagram account. And she has amazing food pictures. But you could have a very generous salad with this and have some broccoli in addition to your asparagus and keep the same fish, and that would be great. It is also important that you don't eat sometimes. And I'd say there's 2 basic patterns of not eating that are important to think about. And the first one is overnight. How long do you go between your last calories and your next calories in the morning? So you can have, I start my morning with a green tea that I fell in love with in Vietnam a long time ago. But I don't have to put anything in it. So I have that first hour of nursing that tea, and that's included in my overnight fast. That overnight fast should be 13 hours, and it provides triple benefit. It benefits your brain because your brain is better able to hose down the streets, rearrange the tables, get ready for the next day if it's not also receiving input from your gut. It allows your gut to recover. So if you tend to have an overgrowth of bacteria in your small intestine, or a tendency to a yeast because you have kind of a consistently high and lower blood sugars, it's going to help your gut be healthier, and it reduces cancer risk of prostate, colon, and breast. Oh, aren't those the most important preventable cancers we could talk about? Yes. So 13 hours overnight, you don't have calories. You can have water, you can have herbal tea, you can have caffeine. Not a lot would be ideal. Like 6 cups of espresso could hijack that kind of purpose early in the morning. But you could have a little espresso or a little coffee or a little tea. There's another point about not eating. I want you to think of a nice pasture, a green pasture filled with cows. What do they do all day? They eat small, frequent meals of grass. Their intestines are way longer and more complex than ours are. And they can do amazing things with grass, turn it into butter. And their trick is to eat small meals frequently. There's nothing we have in common with those cows when it comes to our eating strategy, and there shouldn't be anything we have in common. We can eat the grass if you like grass, although there's better vegetables than that. But we are not meant to be constantly eating frequent small meals. It's much better that we have a meal, silence, a meal, silence, and either do that 2 or 3 times over the day. That also is really good for your gut health, and having good gut health is key to having good brains, good muscles, good bones, and not getting cancer. So, let's have good gut health. So not a lot of snacking between meals would be a good idea. A really important food group is protein. And all these different foods contain protein: animal protein, dairy protein, nut protein, and on a slight little part of the slide over on the left is some grain protein. And that's kind of fine as dessert, but it doesn't really count as protein. It has way too many other things in it that invalidate its value as protein. 2/3, 3/4 of your plate, your meal, your menu, your shopping cart should be vegetables and low glycemic fruit. The healthiest fruits on this page are this avocado nestled in there. I would actually make it so there's just 1 apple, 1 lemon, and 6 avocados. If it was my shopping cart, I buy 5 or 6 every week, thinking you should have at least a half an avocado a day. But all these other great vegetables provide the raw material that you can do healing in your gut and produce chemicals in your gut that are good for your brain. Fats from food, fats from eggs, fats from even sausage tucked into that egg, fats from the avocado, and a little bit of fish on the side. Oh, and some more fish. And then scattered here next to this picture of edible fish is fish oil. And if you were going to just take one supplement for your brain, I'd say it should be a high DHA, high quality fish oil. And the only one commercially available that meets all those criteria, to my knowledge and in my opinion, is some of the Nordic Naturals fish oil that has both EPA and DHA, and you can get a good 1,500 to 3,000 milligrams in fish oil capsules from Nordic Naturals. They take really good care of their fish. You don't want to get it at Costco, or I mean, I love Costco, but or someplace where they may not carefully be safeguarding shepherds of the fish oil itself, because if it's oxidized, it does more harm than good. So you want it to be caretaken all the way from its home in the sea to its home in your refrigerator to its place in your mealtime. Lifestyle is pretty simple. Get good natural sleep for 8 hours a night. And what do I mean by natural? There's all sorts of supplements that are boosts to elements your body makes anyway. Maybe something like melatonin that we make a lot less of when we get older, taking a few milligrams of melatonin. It might be something like L-theanine, which helps your body make GABA. You want something that having a drink of alcohol or an actual sleeping pill to knock you out at night would give you brain waves that don't look like real sleep, wouldn't look like natural sleep. There are 2 prescriptions that give people what we call natural sleep. Usually one or the other of them is well tolerated by people who have really chronic sleep trouble, but there's lots of other ways to get good sleep with which I'm sure many of you are very familiar. Meditation, turning off the silly computer in the evening so we don't have blue light, or having, my latest glasses. I don't know if you're getting any reflection in these new glasses of mine, but somebody said the other day, oh, your reflections are all blue. I said, well, that's because you're offered the possibility when you buy glasses now of having blue blocking lenses in every eyeglasses you buy. And I do think I've been sleeping better, and I don't even like these glasses really. Anyway, be like this healthy, exuberant woman and exercise every day, both in your body and in your brain. It's tricky sometimes to find brain stimulation that is effective and doable. If you are functioning at a really high level, there's computer-based brain training that has good research that if all you did was that, but of course that's not all you're going to do. You're going to do all these other things a little bit too. If all you did was brain HQ, you could improve the function of your brain and your scores on brain HQ and your performance in cognitive testing. We have patients who could come nowhere near figuring out how to even turn their computer on, let alone do brain games on their computer. And for them, we have in the office some boxes of cards that have matched pairs of birds, 2 cardinals, 2 blue jays, 2 canaries. You turn them face down. You start with 6 cards and you work your way up to the full box, and you're turning them over one at a time to test your memory and see if when you turn them back over, you can remember where that other red bird was, and maybe you'll remember the name of it if you play this game long enough. You can ask us, we'll tell you where to get that. And de-stressing. And many people are very aware that they have stress. If you're not aware you have stress this year, let me tell you about the concept of denial. But I think everyone acknowledges they have stress this year. And there's times when many people are not really even aware whether or not they're having stress, and that's fine. I don't think you need to throw out every ounce of denial. It's a really good defense mechanism. But de-stressing is good for anybody, whether you have conscious stress or not. And I think of it as, if you're going for a hike, it's really good on the hike to stop and pause and look at the view. That's de-stressing actually in and of itself, but it's just a different way of being in the world than moving through the world. And similarly, de-stressing is a time to put your brain on pause. So people say, oh, I de-stress, I sit around and watch TV with my partner, and that's great. You can do that. But I'm talking about the time where your brain gets really quiet, where it's like you're not necessarily figuring out, following a funny plot, laughing at the jokes, listening to somebody's accent. You're doing something pretty chill. And we have an example of it in the presentation a little bit later on. And there's lots of examples of this as well. If you want to get really precise, okay, I can follow all those recommendations, but I'm really worried because I know I have the ApoE4 gene. One of my parents got Alzheimer's young. It would be worth doing some precision house cleaning, and these issues are detailed in Dr. Bredesen's book. Um, Blood sugar is something that a lot of doctors pay attention to, wanting it a little bit lower than just well-managed diabetes, but actually in the optimal range, not just the normal range. Homocysteine is an amino acid that the body recycles. Remember I said if you could just take one supplement, you should take fish oil? Well, if you're taking fish oil and you feel like you're not getting anything out of it, you should check your homocysteine. If your homocysteine is outside of the range of 5 to 7, 5 to 8, it could be blocking the effectiveness of fish oil in your brain. So you'd want to attend to getting your homocysteine normalized. That involves a little bit of look at your readily available genetics to see what kind of B vitamins you need. And so, yes, you might need to take some B vitamins and some minerals, and make sure you don't have a high marker of inflammation. And that's something that doctors do commonly in annual lab tests, the HSCRP, and there's other tests for inflammation we might do if somebody has, for instance, a genetic SNP that says, ooh, you probably have trouble with the inflammatory marker TNF alpha. We would also test that in somebody who had that genetic SNP. And as I said at the beginning, it's a little controversial in the world at large, but your brains love hormones. Women get far more dementia than men do, but they get it later. They get it. So if men are going to have dementia, they typically get it, other way around. Women get twice as much dementia and they get it earlier. A man who has ApoE4 will keep his brain because he keeps his testosterone, but the ApoE4 will cause him to have that increased risk of cardiovascular disease. A woman has estrogen longer in her life, which protects her against cardiovascular disease, even if she has the ApoE4. But when she loses that estrogen, it's a key communicator in the brain. There are brains that have particular estradiol receptors. And at the age of 60, it's fairly common for a man to have higher estrogen than a woman. What? Because a man takes his testosterone, runs it through his belly fat, which doesn't have to be very much, and makes himself some estrogen. So estrogen is vital to the brain of both men and women, but women who have high levels of estrogen for most of their life like relatively high levels, nothing like a menstruating young woman, but like relatively high levels of estrogen and progesterone in menopause and for the rest of their life, for the health of their brain. And we did a talk earlier on about hormone replacement therapy, particularly for women, but also for men. And I think you can find that, or let us know if you have any trouble finding that talk. Thyroid's an important hormone that we test for a little more thoroughly than conventional primary care doctors do. We do 6 tests for thyroid instead of just 1 or 2. And then this hormone this is such a strange hormone, pregnenolone. It is a really important hormone, particularly in the brain. It's a really critical hormone. I learned about it in medical school and then didn't hear about it again until I got involved in brain health. It's like the den mother in the room of the brain. It has all those crazy nerve cells separated from each other, organized, and communicating well with each other. It's a hormone that is the first hormone your body makes from cholesterol. Really important your body prioritizes it. If you go through a period of stress, you'll chew it up. It really helps you get through stress. And if you're over about 50 or 60, you probably won't replace it. So it can be really low. Now, what's funny about this hormone, you'd like your level to be about 100, and you can just get it on a regular blood test, is that it's over the counter. All these other hormones, which are important, are by prescription, heavily, protected by prescription. Pregnenolone and DHEA, also important, but not quite as important as DHEA as pregnenolone, are available over the counter. So go figure, it's easy enough to get yourself a pregnenolone test and optimize your level to a level of 100. It's important to eat organic foods. Anything that has fat in it, that moves and grows, really, well, I'd say animal fat. It's important that it be organic. Avocados are actually on this list. You've seen this list before. This is a couple of years old already. The Dirty Dozen, that you should always buy these organic, and the Clean 15, even avocados you can buy inorganically, and the Avocado Safe. I wouldn't buy sweet corn or pineapples because it's not good for the earth they're grown on, to not raise them organically, but you can continue to read that and see. It's actually important that you also be organic in your house. And there's so many options now, and vinegar fulfills most of them. But many of these, the chemical versions of these organic products have insidious ingredients that can be toxic and make your liver hard to clear them. In this valley, everyone has a toxic level of MTBE, which is a gasoline derivative. We all, in this funnel of a valley, inhale the fumes of 30,000 automobiles or trucks every day. We have a hard time getting rid of it. We can test and I can show it to you, but I've never seen anyone in this valley who doesn't have a moderately to severe toxic level of MTBE. What can you do about that? You can sweat, and when you sweat, soapy shower it off. Avoid re-exposure. So if you did find out that you go to a nail salon and it just smells terrible and you're sure it's toxic and you felt sick afterwards, don't go back. There are certain foods that are that impair your body's ability to detoxify. Alcohol is the big one. Take a holiday from it. A lot of people just went through a sober October, and I was one of those strange people who, going through the coronavirus, I've kind of stopped drinking alcohol, which is it's not what I expected to do. Not completely, but mostly. And then sulforaphane is the most important detoxification supplement, and you can get it from broccoli sprouts, which you can make or buy, much better than broccoli itself, and in this supplement called Avmacol. Best studied. Some other people do make sulforaphane, but this is the one. If you're just going to wanted to be picky with your supplements, I'd get either the broccoli sprouts, which are just as good, but they're quite bitter and you may not like them, or the Avmacol. Whoa, there are so many things that are not good for your brain that are a pretty routine part of the life we live. What should be on here is sleeping pills. We talked about, I said there are 2 sleeping pills that are helpful for the brain, but a lot of people use different antihistamines to help them get to sleep, or frank sleeping pills like Ambien or benzodiazepines. All these kinds of medications are an extra burden on your body to process, and your brain particularly to clear out. I will pay attention here to the bottom half of the list. Statins are controversial. There's some things about statins that might be better for the brain. I'd say each one, it's an individual case to deliberate each time it comes up in my practice. General anesthetics, your DNA can tell you if you are going to be easy to anesthetize, hard to anesthetize. If you're easy to anesthetize, it'd be really good to not take a big dose of anesthesia because it's very hard to clear out of your system. Mercury and lead, cadmium and arsenic, easily tested common toxic elements. Mercury, I have a patient who didn't eat much meat, so they primarily ate fish, only ate wild-caught salmon, had a toxic level of mercury, had to go on to fish oil, go off of the salmon until their levels came down, and then ate it a little bit more sparingly. Lead, anyone born before 1970 did spend some time in a house that had lead pipes. Arsenic, if you don't buy organic rice raised in California, you might be getting arsenic from your rice or from chicken, and cadmium if you've ever been exposed to secondhand smoke. Mold, pesticides. We use a bunch of unusually named supplements in our brain protocol, and I'm just going to give you my favorite here, which is ashwagandha. Comes from a really nice berry. That's not a very sharp picture of it. I'll have to find a better picture. It actually helps your body. There are a couple substances in our brain that chew up and get rid of amyloid. I didn't talk very much about what amyloid is. When the sailboat weather monitor in your brain determines there's a storm ahead and we're going to shut down the sailboat for the day, it shuts down that brain cell and it gloms it full of amyloid. Ugh, got a little bug in the office. Gloms it full of amyloid, covers it over like a really dense Band-Aid. That's great. Keeps this damaged nerve cell from, self-destructing even more than it does. But if you ever want that nerve cell to regrow, because it's a sunny day the next day, you need to get that amyloid off of there. So there's a few enzymes in the brain that degrade amyloid. Ashwagandha fuels them. Ashwagandha can lower your cholesterol. It's very calming. So for some people, it helps them either go to sleep or stay asleep. And it's one of those paradoxical adaptogenic herbs that it can also boost energy as well as be calming. So, and it's a little bit the time of day you take it. It's a little bit you and your interaction with the ashwagandha. But it's a very lovely supplement, and the tincture itself doesn't taste bad. What I'd suggest anyone concerned about their brain health is to first ask yourself where you are. How old are you? I'm 30. You've got lots of time, but changes in the brain start 20 years before you have symptoms. You'll notice it before your loved ones notice it, and you and your loved ones will notice it before your doctor can test for it. So if you're going to have any brain deterioration, start thinking about the age of 30 or 40 and get more serious you get older. As I said, women tend to have it more than men. And do you know your genetics? How is your brain working now? How has it worked all your life? If you chose a very simple life, or maybe you didn't choose it, you just really never did that well in school and you stopped after high school and you've had a simple job your whole life but been happy with it, that's great, more power to you. But you didn't build up as many alternate pathways in your brain as somebody who has an advanced degree, has gone through a few different careers. Even though that shows restlessness on their part, they've had to learn a lot of different paths to navigate the earth, and that gives their brain some resilience. So we can actually test, how is your brain power? We can do a face-to-face paper and pencil test, or a computer-based test for people who ace the paper test. We draw labs and get an MRI on people to look at their size of their brain. Oh, your brain is not shrinking from Alzheimer's. You have inflammation. I think you have something toxic going on in your brain. That's the kind of thing an MRI can show us. And then we start doing specialty labs. What could be toxic that we can't get in a regular blood panel? As I said, for many people want to do some form of genetics, and you can do through our office. You have to work through a physician affiliated with Intellex DNA to get their proprietary information and get them to look at your genes. So remember I said everybody should de-stress. So we've just gone through almost an hour of really covering a huge intersectional topic, a little bit about genetics, a little bit about the brain, and how do they relate together. So inhale as this diagram expands, and exhale as it goes back into a folded up piece of paper. You can see that this is different from watching television, and it's way more boring. But if you just decide you're going to do something like this for 5 minutes, it really does put your brain on a kind of pause that enables the connecting parts in your brain to reboot themselves. It's a good manager for stress. It's a good manager for overwork and over computering. So 3 basic steps: know your risk, age, gender, genetics, plan a strategy, and what's important is to know your key supports. Do you want the support of your partner? Do you want the support of your close friends? Do you want the support of your primary care physician or a full team that involves a health coach and a nutritionist? Uh, I found people do much better when they get a little more support than they think they need, and it's easier to peel it away than it is to pick it up later. So I think health coach and nutritionist are great members to have on your team. Here's Dr. Bredesen's new book, The End of Alzheimer's Program, much more readable than his first book. Other resources that are online. ApoE4 is a website run by an ApoE44 woman who is in Dr. Bredesen's first book and has reversed her early dementia and kept her brain really healthy through his protocol. 23andme.com, foundmyfitness.com, and TellXDNA, I believe, has an orientation that you can look through a little bit as a consumer to see what is possible in a report. You know where to find us. And I'm going to see if we have any questions. We do have some questions that I will go over. Let's see, some of them we've already done. Rachel's answered one. I'm going to answer this even though it was just addressed to me privately, which is fine because then thank you, Kay. Nobody knows who's asking the question. What are the 2 prescriptions for sleep? I gave a presentation a couple years ago because I think this is phenomenal information that everybody should know. And almost everyone I've worked with you have somebody who has lifelong sleep problems. They either have sleep apnea, and they don't have to store or be fat to have sleep apnea. They have unidentified toxicity somewhere in their house, which could be Wi-Fi coming from their neighbors all the time, or mold. Or they've just tried everything and they can't get themselves to sleep. And there are these 2 medications, and one of them is gabapentin. Gabapentin is used in fairly high doses to help people with nerve pain because it is somewhat calming to the nervous system. It's the pharmaceutical company's version of GABA. It's a GABA that crosses into the brain. A lot of GABA does not cross into the brain, and enables some people to go to sleep, enables some people to stay asleep. And they just take it at nighttime. They don't take it 3 or 4 times a day, like somebody who might be taking it for intractable nerve pain. The other one is trazodone, which in moderately high doses is an antidepressant, but in lower doses can help people sleep. Each one is a trial and error issue. Some people feel too sleepy the next day on one or the other of them. You can try the other one. And then if all those fails, then we're looking more about some kind of sleep apnea or toxicity. Somebody asked about, the cardboard game for no computer people. Ooh, so is that what you attached? Yes, she did. Animal matching. We got our shipment last week and handed our first one out the very next day to someone who came down from Walla Walla to see us. Is it okay to have high pregnenolone? Probably not a good idea, but the range of pregnenolone is wide. So it can be normal for someone to have a level as low as 80, more optimal, maybe 100 to 120. Some normal ranges take it up to 250. I think if your natural pregnenolone is 250, that may be fine for you, but I wouldn't recommend someone continuing to supplement to keep it that high. Everyone I know who's had a benefit from taking pregnenolone just brought their level up to around 100. What are the subtle ways in which we might notice we are having cognitive decline? That's a really good question. So there is what people call brain fog, where sometimes you have brain fog because you didn't sleep well the night before. And that's reasonable to have a little brain fog. Oh my goodness, I do know the name of that singer who sang that song. Who is it? I was trying to think of the name of a one of the things about a new puppy is the first night it sleeps through the night. I am up, of course, at night worrying, is the puppy dead? Because it's 1 o'clock in the morning and the puppy hasn't woken us up. Anyway, so I was awake from 1 to 2 worrying the puppy was dead. And I woke up this morning not being able to remember the name of a therapist I wanted to refer a patient to. And, within a half an hour, I remembered it. So, but I would say at that moment when I woke up, I had a foggy brain. I'd say a persistently foggy brain suggests to me some kind of toxicity, and we shouldn't think that this is just the onset of a cognitive decline. It should be looked into. But being more forgetful, a little bit is normal with age, and a little bit more than you're comfortable with is probably the most frequently observed, self-observed symptom of cognitive decline. Some people will tell me I've never been good with people's names, and that's great. I believe you. But someone says, I couldn't remember my niece's name when she walked into the house. Whoa, that's unusual. So forgetting names of people close to you, or like I always ask people, do you ever forget the names of objects? And they'll say, oh, well, sometimes I can't remember the name of the spice I want. And I said, yeah, but do you ever forget what you call these? And if you ever do forget what you call these, I'd say that's a concern. And the other thing that I would say is a really red flag for concern: distractibility that doesn't catch itself. So I'm putting away the groceries and I start to put the supplements that don't belong in the freezer, because that's where I just put the chicken livers or something. If I start to do it and catch myself, that's awareness. If I start to do it and then worse, put my wallet in there, that's a cognitive problem without the awareness to catch it. That is an early sign of wow. Thanks, Sally. I'll look that up, what you just told me in that message. So if you ever notice that you've put your wallet in the freezer once, you have a good laugh about it, and you probably won't ever do it again. But if you do it more than once, that's the beginning of something you should worry about. Somebody else asked if can anybody take ashwagandha? Do I recommend ashwagandha for everyone or under certain circumstances? If so, what dosage? Anyone who is ApoE4, you are more likely to have amyloid rushing in to bandage up a brain cell that could perfectly well recover tomorrow. It would be good for you to take some ashwagandha. If you have ApoE4 and you have really high cholesterol, in general, high cholesterol is not a problem. Really high cholesterol can be seen in people with ApoE4, and it can get to be a problem in certain ways. They're really complicated, and I don't fully understand them all. They might want to take ashwagandha. If you're ApoE4 and you're stressed, you might do well to take ashwagandha. The dose for amyloid retrieval is going to be 500 milligrams twice a day. I do really encourage people to either buck up, take all those capsules that I've now, got you up taking 4, 5, 6, 20, 30 capsules a day, whatever it is, just buck up, or find ways to take some of them in liquid form. So really the ashwagandha tincture is pretty tasty. I think it tastes like brandy. Not much of a drinker, but there's ways to creative solutions you can find for a lot of these supplements, but some of them just really are in capsule form. And so 500 milligrams twice a day for that ashwagandha dose. I think that does it for about the questions. I really want to thank everybody, whether I know you or not. There's some names I don't recognize here and some I do. Many I do. Thank you all for being here tonight. We're going to wrap this up. And thank you to the Ashland Food Co-op. Really, they helped sponsor this as well. And we will be doing another talk, probably not into the holidays, but as the next year starts up. So please contact our office, Northwest Memory Center, info@northwestmemorycenter.com. If you have a suggestion for a topic you'd like us to do in the future. Somebody asked, does Ashland Co-op have Avimacol? No, that's one of the supplements you have to buy online. But they do have Nordic Naturals good fish oil. So thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. Have an unusual but enjoyable holiday season. And I hope like my puppy and I get to meet you sometime soon. Bye, everybody. Good night.